r/ask Reddit. What did your school waste money on that nobody liked? Or 3D printer that the teachers won't learn how to use, so now nobody is allowed to use it. My school got 4 of those and the teacher responsible for them actually encouraged us to take the SolidWorks course to learn about 3D design. It was actually a lot of fun, and I still have some of the objects I created. I thought my school was like royalty, since we have 2 but 4. And yeah, SolidWorks is actually really fun to do, especially when you get it right. Ugh, this happened so many times when I went to school, but I specifically remember actual nice computers for art that weren't allowed to be turned on because the hippie art teacher didn't believe in it. Turns out they also licensed several copies of the Adobe Creative Suite that went to waste. Some of my classmates won a bunch of money for our school. Our school was one of the lowest funded schools in the district. The district took the money and spent it on another school. That reminds me, when I was a sophomore, my school was next in line to get renovations and upgrades. Only half classes even had air conditioning. Instead, the district built a new school that took half of my graduating class. They also took teachers, so my classes were still overcrowded. My old high school had more than enough room for its student size. Then for some reason they decided to build a new school and say they would convert the old one into an old folks home. Well, the old school ended up having mold or something, so it couldn't be used, and it is still just an empty building that people break into all the time to explore. The new school ended up being a lot smaller to where we needed 2 portables in the first semester. Hallways were a lot more cramped. Lockers were about half the size and not very usable. We lost a game room, playground, large open field with a small forest, and instead got a landfill that smelled bad and polluted the water and a fenced off field. There were also a bunch of other complaints that I can't think of right now. Was on boys varsity soccer team in high school. New head coach wanted to emphasize more analytical approach, and as such, had booster club buy a $10,000 goalpost camera. None of the team liked the idea anyway, especially since the girls soccer team used their money for new jerseys and nicer balls, and they still made it farther in their playoffs than we did almost every year. As it turns out, the coach couldn't figure out how to put the camera together, and we never used it. Biggest waste of $10,000 I've ever seen. $10,000 goalpost camera. How much of that was a kickback to your coach? Because for a tenth of that I can buy a GoPro and have a custom made cage to protect it. But I need the absolute best, like the pros use. That's the only way I can become a pro too. My high school wasted a ton of money buying 2 golf carts. Their reasoning was it allowed staff to get to any dangerous scenes faster. Except we never had any accidents and they were mostly used for joyrides by the hall monitors. This seems like a shitty idea regardless. Driving golf carts indoors in a school sounds dangerous. I imagine that it was a school with multiple buildings and outdoor space, but it's funny to imagine them inside tiny hallways. Name tags. Shortly after Columbine and all those other shootings peaked in frequency. It was supposed to keep outsiders from getting in the school unnoticed and shooting everyone, but at the time people doing the shootings were always students. So we joked they were bulletproof. Why not just school IDs? Why name tags? My school had IDs, but we had to wear them on a lanyard so that everyone could see them. Maybe this is what they meant by name tag. If Columbine had them at that time, the shooters would have had name tags too. Because as is the case for most shootings, the ducking shooter went to school there. The funny thing about active shooter drills is the eventual active shooter probably attended the active shooter drill. I'm a teacher. My first year, the school leader bought a ping pong table for the lounge in an attempt to make school more fun and relaxing. It simply became a surface to put copies on. And yet they don't give y'all nearly enough pay, supplies, resources, or support. Seriously, huge hats off to you for teaching our children amidst the difficult circumstances and parameters. My son's current school sent out an email to parents announcing that they'd like to add voice projection to every class. He's in first grade and there are 20 kids in his class. Totally unnecessary. They had a demo session and it sounded horrible. My high school got these midway through my junior year and they sucked. The range wasn't great, and the receiver in one classroom would pick up the microphone in another, and the battery life was awful, so the teachers rarely used it. The best thing that they were used for was the one time that my teacher noticed a kid in the room across the hall was asleep in class. They were watching a video and the other teacher had stepped out of the room for a moment and walked over to the door so that the other room's receiver would pick up his mic and said, "Wake up," and then closed his door. My teacher uses a megaphone because has a Heath and Pet teacher, so when we misbehave in class he closes the door and plays Baby Shark through the megaphone. 2012 Chromebooks that die in like 30 minutes. It's a tragedy when schools try to get tech for their students and basically buy junk because they have no idea what they are doing, and the next time someone brings up doing it right, they just point to it failing last time. It's usually due to government regulations that they have to ask for bids from companies. Then they go with the lowest bidder, typically who provides them with junk. I had a professor who wanted to buy a few oscilloscopes. He personally knew a manager at HP, Keysight, Agilent, whomever it's called now, and negotiated a price of 30% of the original cost. But he was forced to put a bid request, and the school went with the lowest bid, so they got their oscilloscopes, half of which didn't work, at a lower price, but also had to dispose of a bunch of non-functioning scopes at the same time. Bring the cost higher than buying the brand new or gently used scopes from the manufacturer. Trash cans with the school logo on them and banners. They tried hyping us up about new trash cans on the morning show. At my school they took away some of the tables in the cafeteria until we kept it cleaner. We just sat on the floor instead. My elementary school didn't even have tables, we just sat on the floor in the halls. iPads for the kindergarten. They were intended to have educational apps on them that kids could play on at indoor recess. Believe it or not, most kindergarteners would rather play on the swings or play with dolls than learn to write their name on an app. No one used them, no one liked them, and they all broke within 2 months. My indoor recess at that age was the whole group using these big puzzle piece foam blocks to build castles and then crawl all over them. We would not have cared about the iPad either. My kindergarten, we were on a mission to dig to the bottom of the sandbox. Laminated ID cards that everyone had to wear around their necks on some dorky ass lanyard. No one ducking did it, so they made it punishable by detention. After that, half the students still didn't do it, and the detention hall became so overwhelmed that they began to make backlogs. After a few weeks, not wearing a lanyard gave you a detention 2 months from then. Eventually, detention became so backlogged that students started doing more severe transgressions because they would have graduated before they could actually be forced to go to detention. After about a month, no one had to wear their ID cards at all anymore. They said it was for security purposes, so no one could sneak into the school. The thing is, you could put literally anything in the lanyard, and no one would check if it was your actual student ID card. I had a blank index card in mine and no one ever said anything to me. If someone actually wanted to sneak into the school, all they would need is a lanyard and no one would ever check if it's actually authentic or not. My school did that too. And if you didn't have your card you would have to wait to get lunch until the very end when there was almost no food left. It was the worst. When I was still a student, my school spent almost $200K to paint the roads outside our school. You read that right. Almost $200,000 of our precious tuition dollars to paint the roads outside blue and yellow. To pour salt on this painful wound, the paint job didn't even make it through winter. So just to reiterate, $200,000 for 3 months of painted road. I think I'm still angry about it. That's gotta be the dumbest one I've read in here. A lot of them are dumb and that money was spent on technology or other things that wouldn't be used, but those at least keep some value after being bought. This is just throwing money away. When 65 inches TVs were like $4,000 a pop, they set about 8 of them around campus that just displayed the time. $4,000 clocks. Not to mention whatever they used as a video source to send to the display. Not that 4K is a good deal, but you would be shocked at how much even a like 16-inch clock that syncs with the internet/atomic radio costs. Cheap ones exist, but you basically have to take them outside and point them at Colorado to sync. The price goes up like crazy if you want digits more than an inch or two high, and even more if you want an analog one. Our mascot was a rocket, and a certain percentage of school construction money had to be spent on art. They spent $90K commissioning a giant rocket sculpture for the main field entrance. When it was unveiled, the artist had made one tiny change to the design. Instead of a pointy rocket tip, he'd gone with a rounded, mushroom tip. I mean, we thought it was hilarious, especially when they cut off the tip as their solution to the problem, but nobody liked it. They circumcised the rocket? The ladies loved it.